and welcome back to another brand new episode of
Tag and Bag.
There it is, 5 episodes in and still cool to me. Jeff, thank you so much for jumping in again to another one of our jolly podcasts. This week, our chosen topic, very different from everything we previously discussed, is to do with conflict, how we resolve it, what forms it can take, and particularly when you look at the difference between, say, conflict in a professional context, given the industries that we've both openly associated ourselves with, particularly with, very egotistical actors that can sometimes get that, a bit of an inflated view of themselves through the audition or production process, but also in our personal lives as well. It's something I'm very conscious of. We've talked in previous episodes about the importance of being present and how we navigate these challenges. I know, particularly in doing what I do in my day job, being a teacher, I've had to develop a very long fuse. I'm not someone that's very quick to anger. And I think largely because of the work I've done there, because of working with young people where you're around such a sort of hormonal melting pot and so many students that perhaps aren't as enamored with drama as I am. And now I have to try and make it accessible and manage behavior and all of those things. And I think a lot of that does come down to not being too reactive, not being someone that is too quick to rise to something that's challenging or something perhaps I didn't anticipate. And I feel like certainly on the theatrical and performance side, there can, I imagine, particularly when creativity is the nature of the conflict, have you ever sort of experienced a sort of a tricky dynamic between, say, yourself and a director or another cast member where there has been, a clear example of conflict you've had to try and resolve?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, throughout my entire career, there have been issues, where there were just things that seemed to me to be sort of unnecessary, problematic, often rude, often thoughtless. A lot of it has to do with where people are coming from. And one of the things that has changed significantly since I've been doing this, and it's been quite a while now, is when I came into the profession, the model was to have companies of people. Well, companies can be put together in such a way that you have some idea of what you're getting into. And when you're trying to create an entity, an ensemble that is going to, not unlike a sports team, think in tandem and be able to help each other out, it's important that people are alike enough in their enthusiasms, their training, their thinking about certain things, that they're going to be able to work together, because there are going to be instances where certainly any longer you might very well find somebody you're never going to be comfortable working with, and in that kind of a situation, either they're going to go or you're going to go, but you're not going to be able to get anything accomplished together. When I started out, there were certain things that one understood that you served the play. That's not necessarily what happens at all anymore.
Right.
And you served your fellow actors. And again, more and more I found myself on stage with actors, just doing whatever they wanted to do, seeming to feel that every moment was about them.
Right.
No sense of like, how do we, help the audience know where to look and what's important? It can't always be, it's not a one-person show.
No, and even then, in examples where, I've seen Patrick Stewart do A Christmas Carol. He played all 23 characters by himself.
Sure,
There's
sure.
still a production team there that has not all been put together by him, and having that understanding and appreciation of that dynamic is the thing that reduces the chance of that conflict bubbling and getting worse, right? And
Right.
that also, I suppose, just off the back of something you said there, it's an old improv rule that I've always followed, which is that you serve the server that's serving you.
Yes.
It's that yes and approach, right? Is you agree with the thing that they've said and you build on it. And that having those kind of mindsets and those kind of approaches are the thing that I think mitigate often where the ego gets involved and when, people's vanity starts needing to be served, in those contexts. So that can, I think, naturally create a certain tension especially when you've got something so close knit as well. You're in a cast of, very creative and very passionate people. Um, do you find therefore that sometimes that there have been instances where ego has been served before the art?
Oh, absolutely. Way too often these days. Yeah.
Mm,
I mean, I can give you a very specific example. We were doing a production of Singing in the Rain, which in itself was probably not a great idea because, after all, you can see the film and it's all those really incredible people. But we were doing it. And there's a moment where the producer, which is the role I was playing, has been brought in to listen to Kathy Selden sing a song, You're My Lucky Star. Fine, that's great. And, both Don and Cosmo are hoping she'll perform well. And then there was a director, an actor playing the director who was going to be working with her. And I was sitting and I was listening to her performing, and all of a sudden I heard these, and I'm sort of, trying to, as casually as possible, sort of glance around, and this fellow playing the director
mm,
was acting like he had been working with her, so he was like living every moment that was going
right.
on with her. And it's like, afterwards we got off stage and I said, are you making noises during that sequence? She
Right.
was like, yeah, he was. And I
What, as
said,
if it
well,
was sort of like a bold choice that they were making.
and I said, could you not? And he thought, you're joking, right? It was like, you're serious? And then of course he didn't speak to me again, which was perfectly fine with me. But it was
Well, yeah,
so
no, no great loss to you,
selfish.
but
It was
yeah.
so selfish. It's like, this woman is out there trying to do her job, and you're making everyone look at you. He was a dreadful, dreadful actor.
Yeah, because
And
that,
I've encountered that with a number of people recently.
yeah,
Just,
and that
it's like, what
because that becomes more about serving their own, uh, well, I
the
suppose their own creative input, right? Like they're trying to sort of service something that they feel is appropriate for the moment or the scene, as opposed to
yeah,
asking what does the scene need,
yeah.
to
Well, and
actually,
again, I blame the director to a certain extent, because
but not stepping
obviously,
in.
well, yeah, number one. And number two, I have a director friend who I have worked with as an actor. And very often, one of his last notes to the cast, and to all of us individually, will be just tell the story. To which my response is, well, that's great. Would that we had ever sat down and discussed what the story is, because obviously this person thinks it's about a director. This
Hmm.
person,
Hmm.
thinks that it's about the actor. It's that kind of a situation.
Yeah, that kind
So
of note is about as valuable to me as when a director says, guys, the scene needs more energy.
totally,
What
totally.
does that mean?
Yeah.
Run faster? Like what
Yeah.
what what could that
And it's just
possibly
like all
apply
the
to?
same. What, okay, how fast, in what
Yeah, what's
direction,
our
for
baseline here
how
for this?
long?
Yeah.
No, that's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
And that can be, I think that can almost engender a sense of conflict because you're then frustrated as the actor, as the creative, as the team player, who is then not being given the appropriate direction, or as you specifically cited, watching someone go off on some weird tangent, making these choices in service of the scene, when really they just want the audience to be looking at them.
Absolutely. And for some reason, I don't know. Maybe my ego is just not that fragile, as far as that goes, because it isn't always about me, and it doesn't need to be. When it's my turn to step up to the plate, I'm happy to do that. But the rest of the time, and I realize I don't see a lot of other people doing this. I tend to sort of literally, move my body so that I'm featuring the actor that I'm speaking with, who
Mhm.
has the more important, text. I was in this same production. I come on at one point to announce that we're no longer going to be doing silent films. We're going to do sound films. And as I was delivering this speech, I sort of glanced to the right of me, and there was nobody there. And I glanced to the left of me, and there was nobody there. And I came into a stage filled with about 20 people, and I sort of casually looked around and realized they'd all moved upstage of me,
Oh,
because
right.
evidently they thought their response to what I was saying individually was more
Mm.
important than what I was saying. And I thought, that's fine. They can do whatever they want to. I just made the audience the rest of the people on the set and spoke directly to them,
Yeah, sure.
you
Right,
know.
turning that into a more direct address moment, you know.
Absolutely. It's like, well, what am I going to do? I'm not going to turn my back on the audience when they're getting exposition, for God's sake. One of
That's
the reasons I'm no longer working on stage. It's like,
no, I
oh,
could. I
shut up
was
with that
just.
nonsense.
If you hadn't made that connection, I was about to, because I feel like there's definitely a through line there from some of the previous conversations we've had.
It has literally been the last, and before before the pandemic, that was the last time I acted on stage. There was a
Right.
series of about 4 or 5 shows where that happened, where one or more actors were so unbelievably self-absorbed and
Mm,
selfish, and I just thought, this is not what I'm used to. It doesn't interest me
no, I get
because
that.
it's so much more fun to
Yeah.
play with your fellow actors,
Oh, for
see what they give
sure.
you and then give that,
Well,
as you
especially
say,
if they're
eh,
willing to actually have a conversation about it and they're willing
yeah,
to actually collaborate in a way that's
yeah,
meaningful. That I think is often the root cause where conflict then really propagates, is that you end up with it being an absence of conversation. It's the lack of talking that often leads to those moments where things can spiral out of control. I've had that several moments when I've been working with, it could have been a student coming to my class, having gotten into one with another teacher. They're bringing
mm,
that to me, and there've
sure,
been so many instances where I've gone, you know who you're talking to, you know the kind of relationship we have. You're going to take 5 minutes, and then we're going to try this again. We're going to
yeah,
have that
yeah,
moment of actually, I know it's a little cliche, but sort of actually taking a breath, actually taking a minute before then coming back and reapproaching that, whatever the source of that conflict was. And especially if it's with me, if in the rare instance something has happened where I've had to sanction a behavior or something like that, I always first let them say their piece, especially if it's to
mm,
catch up. We have a thing called restorative justice in our school,
mm.
where if a student's been given a behavior sanction, maybe they have to sit at detention after school, the teacher that set it goes down to speak to that student so that
Oh,
they're sitting there sanctioned, but then to ensure that then the next lesson you see them doesn't have any kind of lingering resentment or anything that could
sure.
potentially cause additional conflict, they have almost like a preventative conversation to get ahead of that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, and I always every time let them go first, because I know I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to come to that conversation with easy points of justification, things that I could say that explain why I said what I said and why you were sanctioned for your choices. But I always want to hear from them first. And I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
great way to mitigate combat, in amongst, two individuals, especially if you're really getting into it and you're really conflicted, is to let them feel heard first.
Yeah, I think
So much of that I
that's
think
exactly right.
is vital. Um, is that something, do you think that if you've ever been faced with those kind of challenges, both whether it's professionally or personally, or whatever context, do you find that the step to resolving it begins with the conversation?
Yes, I think so. But even more important is what you were just talking about. And that's really, really hearing what the other person is saying, which may
Yeah,
not always be expressed in the language that they're using. There may be
right.
other indicators that let you know what's really going on. But, part of the problem with the profession that we're in and, with so many of these people is that we're also fucking insecure,
Hmm.
and that manifests itself in all sorts of ways, like not wanting anybody else to talk. We're going to
Right.
grab the dais and we're going to, hold the floor for as long as we can to make all of our points. And, that can be sort of ridiculous. It's
Mm.
not really back and forth. It's not sharing. It's not what we should all get better at. And it's always been a problem that I've had, quite frankly,
Yeah.
um, for a lot of
Yeah.
reasons, but, and it's insecurity as much as anything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And if it begins with that, it can be very difficult to move forward, right? Because you're having
Yeah.
to try to somehow figure out how to appease whatever thing it is that's caused their ego to flare up or whatever thing they're being
Yeah.
vain about. Um, like you said, actually giving them a sense of listening as well. I do think
Mm-hmm.
that's so much. I do have a real thing with that. which is that, you know, if someone's making a point, there's always a natural ebb and flow in a conversation. Someone says something that makes you think of something that you want to build on it, the yes and idea. Of course, it's going to be natural that you want to do that. If someone literally is just changing the topic and the conversation, they're basically just having a chat with themselves, essentially,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
actually listening. That's the one that I really struggle with that. And that has definitely motivated some conflict in my own
Yeah.
both personal and professional life. You know, that can be a really tricky thing. Now, the flip side of this, the other side of this conversation, is then finding meaningful ways to celebrate success. Is when you do have a great collaboration and you do figure out something that actually is worth preserving and being really, you know, something you want to really champion. And I have often been quite bad at sort of letting a problem go. You know, with all of the kind of ideas of like, you know, if I've done something that's very successful or creative and it's been great, really great response, but then I'm lingering on it's almost like that, you know, you get 20 comments on something, 19 of them are uniformly positive, and then one is a bit mid, and you're only thinking about that 20th comment, right?
Oh yeah.
And it's a
Oh yeah.
real challenge I find sometimes to sort of, no, I did all right. I did, you know, we together created something really interesting. I find it sometimes quite challenging to celebrate those things. It becomes very easy to be quite sort of self-reflective in a negative way on stuff that you're
Mm-hmm.
producing. Um, have you ever found yourself sort of being creatively restricted in the work that you've done out of perhaps a fear of not being good enough or wanting to appease someone, or you know, has there
Oh,
ever been an
sure.
instance where you sort of
Absolutely.
questioned yourself a little bit?
Oh, always. Always. No,
That
I mean,
surprises me though, Jeff, given the fact that you have had this sort of such a storied career. It's
no, you gotta understand though, Jonathan, you're looking at it from the outside. You're not looking at it
yeah,
from the, point of view of the person who's experienced this
sure.
so-called legendary career. Because from my perspective, I'll give you a very good example. I was thinking about moving from New York to Chicago. I lived in New York for about 6.5 years, from
Mm,
2004 to about 2010. And at that time, I got very frustrated with where sort of my career or my, professional creative life was going. In fact, it had to do to a very large extent with the fact that I couldn't put my finger on it for the longest time. And then I realized that what I was missing in New York was that sense of ensemble, because everybody who is in New York tends to be auditioning for the next better, bigger job,
right.
which means that they may all be perfectly wonderful actors, but they're working in isolation. They're working for themselves, not for the good of the other people necessarily, or for the project they're working on. It's like, how am I going to get noticed? Some people are
Mm,
unbelievably egregious as far as that goes, and you sort of dread seeing their name in a cast list.
yeah.
So anyway, I was thinking about going to Chicago because there are people there who it's sort of the epicenter of the improv world. And there's this amazing duo called TJ and Dave, who I have always been blown away by. And I had a chance to talk to Dave Pasquesi, who's the Dave of TJ and Dave. And he talked a lot about what you do to make the other person look like a genius. And it was all about really the thing I was most interested in. It's like, okay, ensemble, how do you create that? And
Mm,
I'd had an experience with a cast who, while being a company, could not have been less supportive of each other. They paid no attention to each other on stage. So anyway, I thought, well, I'm going to go to Chicago. That's where I'm going to find the answers to all my questions. And my friends who were in Chicago said, "Oh, that you'd be starting from scratch. You're doing so well." And I thought, "Am I? Am I doing that well?" I mean, how do we gauge what that is? It's like, well, I've been working pretty consistently, and I've done some things that other people I know are impressed with. But if you don't feel that, you know,
yeah, that's true.
then
That
then it
idea, I
then it
suppose, of
didn't
like,
happen. It's not real.
yeah, it's well, you alluded to it earlier when you said about looking in from the outside. My
Mm-hmm.
perception of someone like yourself versus the reality of what you're feeling about your career and everything you've achieved. They're two
Sure.
very, very different things. The perception versus reality thing is, Christ, that's an episode in itself. But that is something I've definitely, and whether that manifests through imposter syndrome or just, a classic case of self-doubt,
Sure.
it's very easy, I think, to create an internal conflict within yourself within that. And that's
Sure.
something that I definitely find I'm very fortunate. I've got a really great set of friends around me, and my wife, my parents, very supportive. I can sound this stuff out if I'm ever concerned, or if I'm working on something that excites me, I can share it, and I feel like it's less of a less self-serving than or anything to do with it, sort of any kind of ego. It's actually more, no, I'm doing this because I really believe in it, and that helps resolve that internal struggle a little bit. So I think so many people, and this has definitely been apparent from the work that I've done in mental health. I run a mental health charity here in the UK, and
Mm-hmm.
so much of the internal struggle that people have is the feeling that what they're feeling is just them. They are just feeling this by themselves. So
Oh, yeah,
whatever
yeah, yeah.
whatever thing that they might be,
I see what you're saying.
they might be, yeah, whatever they might be going through, that internal struggle, that internal conflict, or a conflict they might be having with a friend, a spouse, a family member. They're the only ones going through that right now. No one else could
Right.
possibly
Right.
understand. Um, what do we do if we know people in those instances? What do we do to help try and break that cycle for people that feel like they are just on that island by themselves and just
Well, I would imagine that the thing to do is to try as best you can to make it clear that you are there to support them, to help
right,
them in any way they would like to be supported and or helped, because a lot of people get very uncomfortable when you reach out to them
right,
for that kind of thing. So it's like you don't want them to think that you don't care or that you're not available, but at the
mm,
same time, finally, it seems to me the person has to be the one to say, I need help and I need it specifically from you or
yeah,
not, you know?
no,
Um,
absolutely,
you know this from from your own experience. It's like, when do we ever change
yeah,
behavior, you know? It's, I mean, for years I was a heavy, heavy smoker, smoked 3.5 cigarettes, packs of cigarettes a day, 3.5
wow,
packs a day. And at a certain point, for a variety of different reasons, I decided that's it. And I was able to stop, but it had to come from me, you
that's a
know?
really good point. It
It
had to be
wasn't a
something from
case
you.
that, yeah, you've got to make that decision. Like, I don't want this to continue. Having the objectivity to realize how you might be harming yourself, or
Yeah.
what it is that you're doing that's making you unhappy, that's all hard to come by.
Yeah, and that it begins with the self-awareness. It begins with that self-awareness of yourself to know, "Well, I am ready to be helped by those same people that I kind of made their presence known." Like you said, they were present
Yeah,
and ready when you are to be helped and supported. But until you're ready to make that leap yourself, it's not something you can just action like
yeah,
that. Um,
yeah. I had a situation some years ago where I'd come back from New York and I was living in Seattle, and my son and I, sort of, something happened and we fell apart. He wouldn't see me, and it kind of drove me a little bit crazy. So I did something I often thought I should have done, which was to go to therapy. And I was very lucky. The very first person I went to turned out to be extraordinarily helpful.
nice.
And in the course of my 6 years with this particular therapist, I came to realize that almost every scenario I had created for myself about my life was about 180 degrees wrong. So, when I thought that, well, in this instance, I was a victim, it's like, well, no, you weren't. You actually created the circumstances that led
Reframe that.
to this.
Mm.
Exactly. You know, uh, uh, it's, I had to do it because I think I would have lost. I don't know what would have happened. It would have been terrible. I think I would have been a very unhappy person.
For
And
sure. And that
why would you want to be an unhappy person?
And yeah, my goodness. I mean, you've hit on something really, really prescient there, really, really relevant because you know, you're having conflict with someone, it could be within yourself or with another person externally. Sometimes that third perspective, that sort of almost an impartial view, can
Mm-hmm.
break the deadlock of
Yeah,
that. Which again is a really challenging, but ultimately a very profound thing. And if nothing else, for anyone listening to this and you're facing a similar scenario to that, take away from this conversation the notion that you can break down those barriers and get through that conflict, whether it's internal or external, by rooting it in conversation. And that's
sure.
something that can truly, genuinely make a profound difference. Um, Once again, we have, managed to cover a swath of conversation and topics. And as we now wrap out our 5th episode of Tag and Bag, I really do want to just take this opportunity just to thank you again, Jeff, mainly for your honesty and how willing you've been to participate in every single possible tangent and segue that these conversations have gone off to. And that was my first voice crack, which I know people will now be looking at. I definitely just did it. So I made it so close to the end. But no, Jeff, it really is something I am massively grateful for, because you've been so willing and so open with your time and yeah, so thank you for that. I know that.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
Yeah, it really has. You can find us on all the various social platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc., at Burly Bird Media. We're also live streaming now on Twitch, so please check us out on there. You can find the incomparable Jeff Steitzer at jeffsteitzervoiceactor.com. I'm trying to think of a different adjective every time. Um, and as well as on Cameo, you can request a personalized video from Jeff on Cameo, and all of those links and details will be provided at the bottom of this video and on all the good places that we put our jolly podcast. Jeff, thank you again, and all the very best.
You too, bud.